like where would you use avocado oil or olive oil?
I don't use avocado oil.
Mm-hmm.
Olive oil, if I'm cooking potatoes on like a skillet.
In a skillet.
Or with, over like some veggies that I'm going to bake, I'll use olive oil. More recently though, I've been using tallow as much as possible and less olive oil. I personally I like the taste of tallow better. I've definitely increased my red meat consumption, like fatty red meat consumption. I mean, even for lunch, I'll have 80-20 grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef, and I'll throw a tablespoon of tallow on top of that because I've seen the benefit of feeling better with a higher fat diet.
Exactly.
So I've been conscious every time I make something, I'm looking at the back of the bottle to see what's in it. And it's funny you bring up restaurants because I don't want to see the back of a restaurant anymore. And that's why, like, if we go out to eat, like me and my wife, I want to spend the money on a higher quality restaurant. And I don't know, but I hope that they are using some better sources of food. But I don't know. That's the thing. You don't know.
You don't know. Yeah, I mean, I was at a restaurant. I rarely go to restaurants, but I was at a restaurant the other day in Costa Rica. I got to hang out with a friend there. I was actually hanging out with Bear Grylls.
I saw that.
Yeah, Costa Rica. Yeah, we got a good reel of him eating some testicle. And, when the guy comes to take the order, it's a ribeye, and it's a rare instance that it's not grass-fed. I'm like, fine, I'll just eat an Angus ribeye. And the waiter comes and I say, I don't want any oil on the steak. I want you to cook it on a dry grill. I don't want anything except salt on my steak for a spice. And I want to make it very clear to them. So for me, a steak cooked on a grill is fairly safe because they're not mixing anything, right? There's nothing fancy about that. And people sometimes when they go, I understand when they go to restaurants, they want to have flavors and they want to experience food. Anytime there's a sauce or something mixed in, I'm almost certain there's going to be a seed oil in there or an olive oil. But let's also say this. So a lot of olive oil and avocado oil is also cut with seed oils. So it's just cheaper. And there's definitely any person listening to this could go to Safeway or a regular grocery store, to contrast that with Whole Foods, and find olive oil on the shelf that says olive oil with vegetable oil. And they're trying to sell it as olive oil, but it's at least 50% canola oil.
Funny you say that. I was at HEB the other day and we were looking for mayo. My wife was making something and I just picked up the jar. I was curious because it said, olive oil, big letters. It was green. And I flipped it around, canola, vegetable, and olive oil. And I was like, these suckers, they'll get you.
Yeah, they will. They'll absolutely get you. And so I think that's a place where people want to use liquid oils is they're making a mayonnaise. My diet's really simple. And that's why I think an animal-based diet can help a lot of people. There's a buy-in cost though. If you want to do this or people want to do this, they have to really give up those things. They have to think about giving up mayonnaise, or sauces and spreads, and because that's all going to have, you can't put tallow in that. Tallow is going to be solid at room temperature for the most part. And it's not going to spread as well. It's not going to be as good. You can't put butter in mayonnaise. I suppose you could, but it'd have to be warm or it would congeal and it wouldn't look good. So again, if I were going to, like you said, I don't eat potatoes or vegetables, but if somebody wanted to do that, and I've talked on previous podcasts about why I'm not a fan of those things, I would use tallow for that, or butter those would be much better sources, much lower linoleic acid sources. So, we haven't really fleshed out all the science behind this. I'm sure we'll do that before the podcast is over. But I think that one of the take homes early in the podcast for people is maximize the amount of stearic acid in your diet. We can talk about why I value that, and then minimize the amount of linoleic acid. I think that a low linoleic acid diet would be so helpful for so many people. And this is really an important thing for me in this work, that I want to help people understand from a medical perspective, what are the real problems? Because I think that the majority of people listening to this, or people that want to get healthy in general, they feel so overwhelmed by health information. They think, oh, I should avoid processed sugar, and I should avoid wheat, and I should avoid gluten, and now I should avoid seed oils, but they're in everything. I love the idea of kind of simplifying it for them and saying, these are the things that I think are most problematic for humans. And the top three, when I was at dinner, I was actually with a guy with Bear, and he said, what do you think are the top three problems for humans? I thought that's actually a great question. I should do a reel or something on Instagram about this. The first one is seed oils. And I don't know, the first two are probably interchangeable in terms of the hierarchy. The first one is seed oil. Like, minimize the amount of linoleic acid in your diet and you will do better. The second is processed sugar. And I think that that's in contradistinction to sugar that is found in fruit or honey that is raw and organic. I think fructose performs very differently in humans, whether it's in a food matrix or whether it's been processed out of the food matrix. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down. And the third one is probably gluten. So if people eliminate those three things, I think their health will massively improve. But that is a big ask for people because it means if you're going to cook potatoes, you got to use tallow. You know, if you're going to cook vegetables, use tallow, use butter. But I think most people can do that with a little bit of choice. And you have to read the labels like you're doing. You have to avoid things like mayonnaise, which are definitely going to have seed oils. And then we can go wherever you want from here and maybe get into the science of why it's so problematic. But I think that there's action steps for people there. And the lower the linoleic acid is, the better. The flip side, I'll just mention briefly, and then we can go into it more in a second, is stearic acid. Again, that's an 18 carbon saturated fatty acid. All you need to know is that's in tallow. So if you do tallow, you're going to lower your linoleic acid. You're going to increase your stearic acid. Stearic acid's great. In human trials, they've done experiments where they made people vegan for 3 days. So they starved them of stearic acid. Stearic acid is yet another compound found only or exclusively or predominantly in animal foods that is essential for human physiology and optimal health, in my opinion, my strong belief. And so they made people vegan for 3 days, no stearic acid, and they look at their mitochondria, these little cellular powerhouses where all of this oxidative phosphorylation happens, where we actually take these macronutrients, where we take these carbohydrates and these protein molecules and we run them through, we run electrons from them through the electron transport chain, and we get energy out of this ATP pump that spins in the inner mitochondrial membrane, et cetera, et cetera. So you can look at the mitochondria of people who have no stearic acid and they basically turn off. They stop burning fat. Mitochondria can also burn fat in a process called beta oxidation. And so like all that stops when you don't have stearic acid. But then you give them back stearic acid. They give them, I think, a big dose of stearic acid, like 30 grams of stearic acid in a milkshake. And you start to see all of this fat burning turn back on for people, and the mitochondria fuse. You can see it in the study. The study's in one of the Nature journals, a very preeminent journal. The mitochondria then fuse and they start working and they turn on in the cell when you give someone back stearic acid. So you think, wow, could this be useful for fat burning? And I think it is. I mean, this is a claim that I think is overly simplified, but if you get down in the science, I think that weight loss for people could be distilled down to this simple idea that if you lower linoleic acid as much as possible, and you increase stearic acid, I'm so certain you're going to lose weight. You're going to lose weight because your mitochondria are going to turn on in your cells. You're going to start burning fat, and this linoleic acid and all these problematic things associated with it, which we can go into in more detail, will be minimized. So that's the formula: lower linoleic acid, more stearic acid.